Okay. Well, good evening and welcome everyone. Today is March 9th, 2021. Thank you for joining us today. I am Phil Santonzi, the program chair for ASQ section 1510, which is the Southeast Florida section. Welcome to the monthly presentation. If you'd like to know more about ASQ Southeast Florida section 1510, please check the communities tab of the myasq.org website. And you can also join our LinkedIn group, which is ASQ Southeast Florida, section 1510, of course. This live event is being recorded, as you know. You don't need to keep your video on during the presentation if you don't care to. That's your choice. As I said, the recording will be uploaded later to the ASQ 1510 YouTube channel. And the PDF version of the slides will be posted to the LinkedIn group thanks to our presenters this evening. During the presentation, please keep your audio muted until we open up for questions. At almost any point, well, we'll leave it up to our presenters when they want to take questions, but typically we wait till the end, but we'll see how that goes. At this point, I would like to introduce Steve Kramer, who is the chair of section 1510. Steve, any words for the group?
No, it's wonderful to see everyone out. And I wanted to, the people that I chatted with on the breakouts, I mentioned that, our student branch has this level quality presentations usually the fourth Tuesday of the month. So we try to make sure that LinkedIn has invitations to both, and everyone is quite welcome and encouraged to attend both. So the students love to see you and you should love to see them. So engage with them. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Any other board members have any messages for any announcements for the group? How about 1515? We have some members for 1515. Any messages or announcements from your section?
Well, I am from 1515. No messages. I sent invitation to everybody, so everybody joined.
Okay, thanks.
Who wanted?
Yeah, thank you very much. Good to see you here. Okay, now let's just go ahead and introduce our speakers in the presentation, which is about how the TWI training method engages people in their work and ultimately becomes a competitive advantage that is difficult for competitors to imitate. Our speakers, Scott Curtis is the president and CEO of the TWI Institute. Scott brought 25 years of manufacturing experience, leadership, and a deep working knowledge of training within industry TWI programs when he joined the TWI Institute in 2012. Since then, he's been working on growing the Institute into a global leader in TWI with partner locations throughout the globe, throughout Europe, Asia, and the Americas. I will put a link in the chat with a little more detail on Scott's bio and the next bio as well for Patrick. But I'll talk about Patrick here for a couple of seconds. Patrick Graupp, who's a senior master trainer for the TWI Institute. Patrick began his training career at the Sanyo Electric Corporate Training Center in Japan. He learned to deliver TWI from his mentor, Kazuhiko Shibuya. I hope I got that pronunciation right, Patrick. Patrick was later promoted to the head of human resources for Sanyo North America Corporation in San Diego. In 2001, Patrick started to conduct TWO pilot projects that became the foundation of the TWI Institute and training projects in the manufacturing, healthcare, energy, and service sectors domestically and globally. As I mentioned, I will put the link to our presentation fact sheet tonight, and you'll find a little more detail to each of the bios for Scott and Patrick. So about tonight's presentation, the topic is how the TWI training method engages people in their work and ultimately becomes a competitive advantage that is difficult for competitors to imitate. As the impact from lean manufacturing and technology improvements continues to reduce and or eliminate operational sources of competitive advantage, the focus for leading organizations is shifting to developing human capital as a source of advantage. This paradigm shift comes after decades of failed efforts to increase productivity by having the workforce do more with less, without any true engagement and development of the most important asset we have, people. In this session, you'll learn how TWI is the foundation for the shift by developing frontline leaders through basic skills of job instruction or standardized work, job relations or employee engagement, and job methods, Kaizen. You'll understand a brief history of TWI and how it is relevant in today's manufacturing environment, particularly in achieving standard work. How supervisors and team members can use job instruction, job relations, and job methods to make incremental daily improvements, train people, and lead work teams to create and sustain a true competitive advantage. And simple strategies to help clients struggling with maintaining the gains from their improvement activities. Right? Isn't that right? We usually see the gains slip away when people are not engaged. I think that's probably what we're going to hear some more about tonight. So I turn the floor over to Scott and Patrick. Go ahead, feel free to share your slides, Scott or Patrick, whoever's got them.
Yep, I've got it. So thank you, Phil. Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you.
All right.
Looks good.
Thank you, Phil, for the intro. Get started here. So yeah, I'm Scott Curtis from the TWI Institute. Just a few facts to get started with the program. We talk about TWI. For those that don't know what the acronym stands for, TWI stands for Training Within Industry. It's a frontline leadership development program. We focus building skills into team leaders, frontline supervisors, middle managers, and the hourly workforce to work together in a unified team. The Institute, we use the authentic and original TWI programming. In this is really a program that was developed by the U.S. government back in World War II. It was as a war program. As the United States, the government knew that we were going to be drawn into war, into World War II. They knew they were going to have a serious problem on their hands with all the skilled labor leaving the factories and going off to fight the war. So they developed this program called TWI with a focus on building the leadership capability of the frontline supervisors. And they knew that was the group that was going to have the most interaction and impact on this unskilled labor force coming into the factories. And so that's really a lot of the history behind TWI, where it came from. It's been around since the middle 40s. And after the war, it was unfortunately quickly abandoned in North America. It was a program that those that returned from war viewed it as a war program because it was so drastically different in how it dealt with people from what they were used to, not only in the military, but their previous manufacturing experience. Differed greatly from the command and control type leadership and management style to one where they viewed a high level of teamwork and engagement and supervisors that would ask their workers their ideas on how to do particular work and ideas for improvement. It was a radical shift from what they were used to. So it was quickly abandoned in North America. However, as part of the Marshall Plan, the United States was introducing some of the latest methodologies, not only in manufacturing, but also around quality. Deming and Duran's, ideas and processes were introduced into many of the nations that were defeated. Along with those was TWI. It was also introduced. And then one of the examples that we use is one of the first companies to adopt TWI in Japan was a little company called Toyota. Toyota adopted this in the early 1950s. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we progress. And then finally, the Institute had it maybe mentioned in one of the breakout rooms. We've been around since the early 2000s, since 2001, and really were the organizations responsible for the reintroduction of TWI back into industry in North America. I used to say into manufacturing in North America, but we've been, utilizing TWI, working with organizations outside of manufacturing, in healthcare, in service, in a wide variety of industries. Okay, so let's take a little bit deeper look at what is TWI. Now we talk about lean manufacturing quite a bit in the connection there. In what we say, TWI is really the people side of lean manufacturing. And you compare that to and contrast that to other organizations and consultancies that for many years have been focused on tools and methods. We differ. We focus on people development. As I had mentioned a moment ago, TWI was really foundational for the development of what we know today as the Toyota Production System, TPS, or lean manufacturing. It was one at Toyota where Teiichi Ono, he'd been studying different principles of industrial engineering and looking for ways to improve the efficiencies in the processes in his manufacturing environment. And it was when TWI was introduced for the first time, he recognized that now he had the ability to document and train what he was trying to achieve with work standard work, and then standardized work. So TWI, as we drill into it, we say its methods will really improve stability in the processes. It allows the development of standard work and then standardized work, and it also develops this culture where we have mutual respect for the people between the workforce and then the leadership. We also develop the frontline personnel with the skills to really improve their work. It's Kaizen. This is where Kaizen came from at Toyota, was from TWI. And then one where we establish the right type of mindset to always look for improvement, continuous improvement, at the shop floor. And this ultimately drives and develops a culture. We're transforming through the workforce, through a higher level of engagement and a higher level of skill. We're really driving, and transforming business culture. So most everybody has seen and knows about Rosie the Riveter. Rosie was, she was a real riveter, a real person working in the factory, working on the bombers. And, she was trained in how to do her work with TWI. And she became, really an example of that era. And, but when we look back historically at the improvements that are demonstrated through TWI, this is historical data that we've collected for many years. Very typical levels of improvement through the application of TWI. Now you can see the increase in productivity, the significant reduction in training time, reduction in scrap turnover, which has been very problematic for a number of years. And significant impact on turnover, and then also a significant impact on safety. So just historic improvement data that we still see day in and day out. So why TWI? What is the real need to examine this program, to look at why should an organization consider really diving deep and implementing something like this? Well, we took some information from the Shingo Institute. They did some research on why many of our continuous improvement or lean programs, I won't necessarily say fail, but they don't deliver consistent improvements that we would expect. And Phil mentioned this in the introduction about variation. We see improvement, but then we see erosion. And so the Shingo Institute examined that. They studied that. They wanted to learn why, and then what could we do differently. And what they found were some interesting things. They found that really organizations weren't establishing true work standards. They weren't able to, get their work standards to a point where they were well understood, they were well trained, and they were adhered to consistently. So, work standards were lacking. Insufficient respect and trust to and from employees. And this goes back to, development of, respect for people between the workforce and then the frontline supervisors. And then lastly, many of the organizations and the teams implementing focus too much on tools and methods, and not enough on the employees. And what we mean here is that we need to build the skill into the workforce, into the workers, so that they know when and where to use the tool or the method. So this is, for us, this is the compelling reason on why we should be doing TWI. So just digging just a little bit deeper, when we step back and we look at what organizations have been doing for many, many years, we talk about, we see what we call tactical lean or tactical improvement efforts versus being strategic about it. And here again, we see the quotes on companies focused too heavily on tools, from the Toyota Way, author Jeffrey Liker. Tactical tools, really small scale events, limited impact. We talk about, Kaizen events and things like that, and not truly engaging the workforce. Whereas if we approach this from a strategic point of view, one where we have our higher level strategies on what we want to achieve for an organization, and then through Hoshin and some other approaches, we get a really unified system and really good tactical approaches to improvement, and then all of the workforce is aligned on what those strategies are, what we're trying to achieve. So the work that they're doing on a per shift basis, on a per day basis, weekly, monthly, it's all in alignment with the higher level objectives. And then when we take a look at, we say that the outcome, the impact, the reality of tactical lean, these are what we see quite often, and you probably have experienced these as well. We rely on scheduled events to make changes. We're stuck in the mud until we have to have a scheduled event to think about improvement. People resist participating primarily because they're insecure about getting involved. They're not sure about these these new programs, new processes, and that goes back to that building a good level of engagement and level of respect between the workforce. People think it's somebody else's job to improve. Shop floor employees, well, that's the engineer's job, or that's the black belt. That's their job to come up with the big grand ideas on how to improve. And so they tend to wait for others. And then the classic one, the last one, the last bullet point is leadership, supervisors, and others. They're always too busy, always worrying about today's crisis, putting out today's fire, saying with good intentions, well, we'll do that tomorrow, or we'll get to that next week. And we all know that in most cases, that never happens because they're always in this vicious cycle of chasing their tail or putting out the fire. So those are some of the realities and symptoms of tactical lean. And when we take a look at the outcome of those variable efforts, we start with an event-based improvement activities. So we've got our current standard. We say, okay, we're gonna do an event-based. We're gonna do a Kaizen event, and we expect improvement. We expect to develop a new standard. So we put wheels in motion. We do the work. We do the projects, and we do see that improvement. But what happens, and I think we've all experienced this, is over time we see erosion, backsliding. And we say, all right, well, we've got to do something else. Let's do another event. And so, we move the bar, we raise the bar, but we get into the cycle where we see that the classic sawtooth improvement curve. Improvement is happening, but it's variable and it can be frustrating. So those are the gaps that we've all experienced. So really, what we are lacking and what we need to do is focused on creating some stability. We have to create stability in the process. And I know that this rings true with many of the ASQ folks that are lean Six Sigma black belts. You cannot improve a process that is not stable. It just can't happen. So, from our perspective, yes, you have to create that level of stability in order to improve. And when you take a look at this on a basic level, and this is where we'll get into some of the detail, our friend Art Smalley, who spent many, many years at Toyota, he quotes that, knowing that jobs are always done the same way will establish a predictable process. And this is really what's needed first and foremost, to create true standard and standardized work, and to be able to really predict and flow and maximize your operation. So it's, if nothing else from tonight, we first and foremost, we want to stabilize the process, stabilize. So how do we do that? How do we start achieving basic stability? Well, it's through these programs that Patrick is going to talk in more detail about. Some of the programs, the 3J programs we call them, job instruction, where we're creating stability through how we train our employees, job relations, on how we create the right environment to accept change and to work together as a team. So if we go back to the event-based model, we do an event, we come up with a new and better way to do a particular process. We document it well, we train well, and we work well together as a team. So therefore, you're able to maintain that new level of standard. And then we can go on, do the next event and move up that improvement curve at a much higher and a steeper pace. And, at the bottom of this graph, you can see Teiichi Ono, the architect of TPS from Toyota. One of his famous quotes is, without standards, there cannot be Kaizen, or there cannot be improvement. So you have to have your standards in place. You have to create stability to maintain the standards. Then you have a good solid foundation. Then you can improve. And lastly, with this line of thinking, when you start to integrate all three of these together, the job instruction, how we train our employees and document our standards, job relations, how we work well together in a team, and then we introduce job methods, which we'll talk in more detail about, which is Kaizen. We can then really accelerate this improvement curve, and so we introduce a structured approach, a structured process for employees to now take their ideas for improvement, exercise those, validate, and if it is an improvement, we have a method to document, redocument, train, and retrain, and this is where we start to get those small incremental improvements that we're looking for, particularly from the front line, the shop floor employees. So this is how TWI can really accelerate the improvement curve in a continuous improvement or a lean environment. And so that's how you take a look at this in totality. TWI becomes a really a foundation or an integral part of any lean, continuous improvement, whatever you want to call it, strategy. And it's one focused on, once again, building these skills into the workforce, and skills where they can really create that stability in the process. And that's what we're focused on. All right. Now, I know that we do have quite a mix of experience in employees, on the meeting tonight, and I know that there's a number of black belts on the call. In my experience in 30-some years of manufacturing, early on there was the argument or the camp. What camp are you in? Are you a Six Sigma person, or are you a lean person? And it seemed at times the two didn't really want to coexist. But in my opinion, in my experience, they work best together. They should be integrated into a holistic approach to improvement, and it's one really focused on driving value for the client. And you have to determine what is the drivers. Is it quality? Is it cost? Is it time? But then you have to utilize the various tools and methods at your disposal, quote unquote, in your toolbox, in order to achieve that. And so therefore, when you take a look at all the different things at our disposal, we have theory of constraints, all the things that we can do there to help flow the work and flow our processes. We've got how do we stabilize the process? All of our lean tools, so to speak, and you can see where TWI fits into that model. It's not the only thing, but in our opinion, it's absolutely the foundation that needs to be in place in order to make all of the other lean tools, so to speak, work and work well. Without TWI in place, you're building that classic Toyota house on a foundation of sand. It's unstable. And then, of course, all the things that we have around Six Sigma, on how to reduce variation, data driven. In my opinion, these are all necessary, and they work well together. All right. So with all of that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Patrick. Patrick's going to take now a deeper dive into the TWI programs themselves.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So Scott has told you, all these wonderful things that, TWI, can do for you, and where TWI came from. And you've been listening for some time and wondering, gee, well, what is this all about? What is this? How does that really work? So let's dig down, and I'll show you exactly what TWI is and where it came from and what it does. It's just a very high level overview. There's so much detail in each one of these TWI programs. We could spend the whole day literally talking about any one of those programs. So I'll touch on some of the highlights, and then hopefully if you're interested, you can come back and dig deeper. TWI comes from this model, which we call the 5 needs model, which actually goes back to the early part of the Industrial Revolution, really World War I. And back in the early part of the Industrial Revolution, they were asking themselves, what would a frontline supervisor need in order to succeed in their responsibilities? And they divided that into 2 kinds of knowledge and 3 kinds of skills. So on the left hand in the blue, you see the knowledge of the work and a knowledge of responsibilities. That's something that anyone would learn locally, in your own business, in your own industry, in your own company. And so that was learned locally. So TWI didn't touch on that. But the 3 skills were universal. And so they said you would need a skill in instructing, teaching your people how to do their jobs. Look at this one, skill in improving. So even going back to the early part of the last century, they were thinking about improvement, what we today call Kaizen. And then finally, skill in leading people. So when we got into World War II, they pulled out this model and they said, here's, those 3 skills are universal. So we'll develop an instruction program around each one of those skills, and then we'll spread that out throughout the country. We'll teach those skills, and that will lead us then to create the manufacturing that would then lead us to win the war. So there were 3 distinct original programs in TWI. The famous job instruction, that was the first one, which answered the need of skill in instructing. Job methods training, or job methods improvement, and that's the Kaizen form. And then job relations training, which Scott's been talking about, which Toyota called that respect for people. And then those 3 instruction methods, then they consolidated those in training manuals. They ran train the trainer programs, and they called it the multiplier effect, where they standardized the training and then were able to spread it very quickly across the country, and had a significant impact both on winning the war and then, as Scott explained, after the war. And we're still using those same instruction manuals today. Okay, Scott, can we go to the next slide? So, each one of these methods can be used on its own. They each stand by themselves. Many, many good companies only do job instruction. It's the most popular method of job instruction. But what I'd like to show here is, when they're used together, when you create that 5 needs model, that's where things really start to click. That's where the magic happens. So, for example, you can have job instruction, which, as you see, is the purpose of job instruction is to train and motivate people to follow a standard. But if you don't have leadership skills, what we learned in job relations, what we say in job relations is a leader is a person who has followers. If no one is following your instructions, then you're not leading. So if you don't have leadership skills, then people will not follow your instructions. So those 2 skills go hand in hand. Same thing with job methods, as Scott pointed out. Taiichi Ohno said, without standards, there is no improvement. So without a foundation of stable practice, we cannot have a baseline upon which to build on improvement, and vice versa. When we come up with ideas for improvement, if we don't have an instruction method to teach people how to do it, then our improvements fall to the wayside. And so you see how job instruction and job methods work together. And then finally, job methods and job relations. We know that when workers, operators, frontline people, get involved in determining their own methods and introduce their own ideas into the process, that builds strong bonds of trust, because they're working together with the company in order to determine, how they do their work and the best ways in which they do their work. So you can see how those 3 skills are very synergistic, and when they work together, you have excellent, strong frontline leadership skills that will really take your company, to excellence. Okay, Scott, let's go to the next one. So let's take a look at each one real quickly. Job instruction training is how we teach people to quickly learn to do a job correctly, safely, and conscientiously. I just threw in there that the Japanese word name for job instruction is shigoto no oshie kata. So many of you are familiar. These days we learned this Japanese word called kata. And if you're familiar with kata or routines, actually the job instruction method is, from the Japanese point of view, it's a kind of kata or method. Okay, Scott, let's go to the next one. Now here, the core of the job instruction method, the famous job instruction method, this is at the core of the Toyota production system. Toyota very famously, back in the early 1950s, received job instruction training, which was their first step, into, as Scott mentioned earlier, being able to write down the method and teach others and spread standard work. So it was the first step towards standard work, and still to this day, it's at the core of the Toyota production system, or what we call lean today. Without going into the details, at the heart of this job instruction method is, what we call the job instruction breakdown sheet. So we divide. It's a very skillful method of dissecting a job and breaking it down into its component parts, what we call important steps. Toyota labels that major steps, but it's the same thing. That's the what you do in a job. And then the key points for each of those steps. That's the how you do that particular step. And then most importantly, the reasons why we do it that way. And so when you teach your frontline people how to think about their jobs and, break it down into the what and the how and the why, then we can and capture the essence of that job. Not every single thing that happens in the job, but those critical aspects in just a few simple words, then they're able to train quickly and effectively. We say boil it down or break it down into simple words, but that's not simple. That takes a lot of skill, takes a lot of experience and a lot of training. So good trainers have, good skill at being able to pick out, that 5 or 10% of the job, those critical aspects of the job, so that learners can quickly able to do jobs correctly and safely and efficiently. And then once we've broken down that job, that's the preparation, we put it into what we call the 4-step method. Each of the TWI methodologies, we call them the pocket cards. When going back to the early days, when they were thinking about this, they said, what's the fastest way and the best way that we can learn a skill? Because remember, we said these are skills. They said the best way of learning a skill is by boiling it down to a 4-step method that people can practice and retain, keep it in their pocket and follow that 4-step method. So Scott, let's go to the next slide and I'll show you some of the features of that 4-step method. One of the keys to, there's lots involved here in the 4 steps. Let me just point out one of the key factors, and that is repetition. We know from brain study, how the brain learns through repetition, through connecting visual and audio, auditory and kinesthetic parts of our brain. And we apply all of those things in the TWI methodologies. So we're going to actually have the trainer present the operation and do it again, each time giving the learner a little bit more information so that they're not overwhelmed with too much information. And what are those little pieces? Of course, the first time we demonstrate the job, the learner will be able to see it and hear just the important steps. And then the trainer will do it again, adding in the key points step by step. And then the trainer will do it again, then adding in the reasons, the whys and the wherefores, all the details of where that comes from, so that each time the learner sees the job, they get a little bit more information, and then they're able to quickly assemble that in a very organized and clear way. And then we're not done. And then in step number 3, we actually have the learner actually do the job, and following that same format, doing the job again, doing the job again, doing the job again. Each time they will articulate the what and the how and the why. And then that way they can quickly get up to speed. They can speed up the time it takes. You saw some of those results earlier in the presentation at how well this method works. Let's go to the next slide, Scott. So that's job instruction. And then job relations, that's the human, the respect for a human relationship side, the respect for people side. And job relations, works on the human action side of it. It teaches supervisors how to take actions that not just solve, but prevent problems with people. And there again, you see the name in Japanese, the hito no atsukai kata. So it's the way to handle people. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Scott. The job relations method, teaches these what we call the foundations for good relations. These are the preventative parts, of our relationships. And if you just take a look at those 4 foundations with a few subheads each, you'll notice this is not rocket science. It's basic common sense and judgment. But as they say, common sense is not common practice. If we can practice these foundations and teach our frontline supervisors to apply these principles of how people get along, they'll be able to build strong relationships and prevent problems from happening. So letting people know, giving them feedback on a regular basis, giving them credit when due, telling them in advance about changes that will affect them so that they can make those changes, working with them to accept those changes, and of course, making the best use of each person's ability. What I've found is that, when you look at people problems, especially in the work site, in the workforce, if you drill down to those root causes of, where that bad behavior is coming from, we can find that it is some failure on our part of leadership. to apply, these foundations. So when we apply these foundations, we prevent problems from happening. We work with our people to build strong relationships of trust. So let's go to the next slide, Scott. Now here's that 4-step method. We said that each one of the methods has a 4-step method, for that we can practice and apply. And so there's the 4-step method for how we handle people problems. And you'll notice, it's just a pretty straightforward, problem-solving methodology. However, with a focus on people. So some of the highlights when we get the facts, we're looking for opinions and feelings. That's where, especially in factories and where people are focused on equipment and machinery, they fail to recognize that people are not machines, that they're human beings, and that we have to capture those opinions and feelings. And so listening skills. When we go into step 2, not jumping at conclusions, not jumping to conclusions, but really looking at all the possible actions, the options that we have, when it comes to solving people problems. There's not only one way to solving, people problems. And then taking action, not passing the buck to HR or to your boss or to legal, but taking responsibility for the actions that we take. And finally, when we check results, did your action help production, or did your action help patient care? If we're talking about healthcare, so keeping our focus. Many times, as we go through this training, when people are, what we find is supervisors will say, their most difficult issues are really dealing with people and how to handle people well. And that's not the training that we typically get, when we go to work, at the plant or at the hospital. Okay, so Scott, let's go to the next one. So that's job methods, and then that's job relations. Now job methods, that's the Kaizen portion, of TWI. And this teaches, leaders how to analyze their jobs, making the best use of the resources now available. So it's not about spending, $1 million on new equipment or new technology, but using those resources now available. And take a look at that. And again, this is going back to the early 1950s, in the early days of lean and what the Japanese called the TWI job methods program was Kaizen no shikata, how to do Kaizen. So as Scott pointed out earlier, really these concepts of continuous improvement and Kaizen, came to Japan, with programs, especially TWI. Many times I think we mistakenly think that, the Japanese, came up with Kaizen because, well, it's got a Japanese word to it. It must be Japanese, right? But actually, no, they learned about Kaizen from programs like TWI. So let's go to the next slide, Scott. So there again, there's the 4-step method. Again, I can't emphasize enough, one of the key elements, of TWI is how we train. We have a training manual. It's a very, very intensive and effective and quick way of training. And we do that through practice because it's a skill, just like swimming or learning to play the piano. We set the method and then we practice through application on actual jobs. And so that's the key to the TWI training. We actually apply in the training programs, we actually apply these to their actual jobs so they can see how they work. And so here you'll notice, we're going to break down the job again into its component parts. And the critical aspect of job methods is step number 2. We're going to question every detail. So you see there on the left, the infamous 5 W's and 1 H. When we question each of those details, and that's the skill. We actually practice questioning, really questioning with a purpose. And the key is what we learn is, the answers to our questions are our ideas. So that's where it's an idea generating methodology. It's how do we bring out ideas, and we do that through this questioning process. And then once we get the questions, actually take a look, go to the next slide, Scott. Step number 3, once we get the answers to our questions, we look at opportunities, and that's step number 3. When we develop our new method, we're looking for opportunities to eliminate, combine, rearrange, and simplify. So in other words, the answers to the questions, why is it necessary? What's its purpose? Well, if it's not necessary, that's waste. We can eliminate that part of the job. If it is necessary, then we continue questioning, where is the best place to do the job? When is the best time? The sequence. Who is the best person? Who's qualified to do that, or who's available to do that? And the answers to those questions lead us then to opportunities to combine, or to do two things at the same time, or to rearrange the sequence into a better sequence. And then finally, last, we don't ask how until we've asked the other questions, because if we ask how is there a better way to do the job? And then we can find opportunities to simplify the job. So that's the method. So you see, there's one of the things that, I don't know if you noticed it on a previous slide Scott showed, is, we oftentimes go out and we ask people, oh, give us your ideas, take part in Kaizen, but we never teach them how to do that. We don't give them a method. We just ask them to pull it out of a hat or pull it out of their ear. And then they're like, I don't have any ideas. I gave my idea last year. I'm done, right? Like, no, as human beings, if we have a good method, a good skill in bringing out ideas, we can have an endless stream of ideas from all of our employees. And of course, that has been, the big success, of companies like Toyota that use these foundational programs. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Scott. So that's a really high level overview of the three programs, the original three programs of TWI. And, Kaizen really has these roots in TWI. The gentleman you see there in the center of me and Scott is Mr. Kato. We're training with him now. He's in his mid 80s. He was the training manager for Taiichi Ohno back in the early 50s. He brought TWI and other, he's called the father of standard work. He brought, the P courses to Toyota, if you're familiar with those things, and Shingo and those folks, he was involved in that. But, he told us an interesting story, in JM, we asked why is it necessary? Well, they were learning JM, and I think many of you are familiar with the famous 5 whys of Toyota. If you ever wondered where those why 5 whys, well, Mr. Kato told us the story that when he was teaching TWI JM, Taiichi Ohno came to him and he said, you're not going to, in JM, you're teaching, ask why is it necessary? He says, you're not going to get to the answer by just asking why, one time. And so that was his complaint. And Mr. Kato said, so he went to Mr. Ohno, to Taiichi Ohno's office the next day to answer his complaint about TWI JM. And he said, okay, then we'll ask why 5 times. So then that became the 5 whys. And so, really even the 5 whys, has its roots, in these TWI programs that first went to Japan. And Mr. Kato also told us some other stories, when it gets back to standard work, how really they were struggling in Toyota in the early 1950s. They had a lot of labor strife. Mr. Ohno really didn't have a relationship with, his workers. And he said it really wasn't until they got TWI. He said for the first time, we were able then to write it down. And so, so the TWI programs that worked so well, during the war, helped us win the war, helped companies like Toyota or Sanyo, where I worked. The whole Japanese economy, was doing TWI and reinvigorated the Japanese economy. And even today, those fundamental programs, are still working to revitalize our company. So I'm going to, with that quick high-level overview, I'm going to turn it back over to Scott. He's going to talk a little bit about some of the, in our final time here, he's going to talk about some of the successes that we see today with TWI.
All right. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, Mr. Kato shared a number of, very interesting stories. And, you think about these mythical figures that created this program, and in reality, they were just normal people like you and I that were, struggling and trying things and found some things that worked. And it's fascinating to talk to these, get the slice of history. So we take a look at, all right, my slide is not advancing. Come on. There we go. Yeah, we first started, we talked about we've applied TWI in a number of industries across across the world. Just a cross section shown here. It's just particularly where organizations are really needing to get to standards. And that if we look at pharma, medical device, in healthcare, just a large need to truly determine the one best way and get everybody following that. Just a couple of quick case studies to show the impact, the relevance of TWI. Cummins Diesel, worked with them for a number of years. They build diesel engines. One of their big plants, they started with TWI, and as most organizations, they had some issues. Their quality level wasn't where it needed to be. But after really implementing TWI job instruction, the training component, able to improve that PPM level from somewhere around 1,500 down to 70. Take a look at the time to train employees. An average job was taking 3 to 4 hours, and even after the training, they were experiencing, still experiencing quality issues and productivity issues. And after using job instruction, they cut the training time in half. And one of the interesting things was not only they cut it in half, but the new trainees, they were able to meet tack time without errors almost immediately. Safety improvements. And then the one that really, to me, stands out, the level of engagement from the workforce. You take a look at the number of ideas that were pushed forward. This is engagement. This is the type of environment that you really want to establish, the culture where people are excited about their jobs. They're excited about what they're doing. They have ideas for improvement. And now they have a structured way to test those ideas, and they have a supervisor and a management team that's interested in what they bring forward. That's engagement. To me, that's the true level that we're trying to achieve. Ingersoll Rand train. If turnover, high turnover is a problem because of poor training, you just you throw people out into the fire, and they're unprepared, they're unskilled, they're overwhelmed. They say, this job isn't for me, and they leave. And so if we can train them well and treat them well, you're going to retain those new hires. Instead of hiring 10 to keep 5, you're going to get your retention rates up where it needs to be. And here again, the training time, reducing that by more than half. And then taking a look at Fujifilm, really just year-over-year productivity improvements, a nice steady improvement, improvement in a reduction in errors and improvement in quality. Goes once again to the process itself, the ability to train and then incrementally improve. So yeah, those
Scott,
are.
Can I give one more example? I didn't realize we would have anyone from healthcare, but Alyssa is with us. She's an RN and from Florida. We were a couple years ago, Scott and I several years ago, were approached from a big hospital in Pensacola, and they were having problems with people who get sick when they get into the hospital. So in other words, they got an illness in the hospital that they didn't have before they got there. It's a big, big problem. And, they were getting 1 or 2 of these hospital-borne infections per quarter, which was just off the charts. They were getting fined by Medicare. They were in desperate straits, and they came to us for help. And we did just JI. They actually just did 2 simple jobs: how to wash your hands, and what we call scrub the hub, to clean the connection from the IV, to if you have a central line. And with those 2 jobs and good job instruction, they trained hundreds of people throughout the hospital. The last we heard, Scott, remember they were at the last year's TWI summit. They had gone almost 2 years with 0 what they call CLABSIs, or the central line infections, after having maybe 1 or 2 per quarter for many years. So in healthcare as well, the results are really dramatic.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's just universally applicable. It's not just manufacturing. It's right. If you step back and look at any environment where you have employees that it's critical enough to train them to follow a set of standards, then TWI is applicable. To train well, to document well, to achieve, and get the group to start thinking about improvement. So it's universal. And then I like to wrap up with this slide. We say an improvement program without TWI is like a bike with no pedals or chain. Just a lot of moving parts, but you're not going to go very far. It's like pushing on a waterbed. You are playing whack-a-mole. You've got to get some stability in a good foundation underneath what you're trying to do to improve. And with that, that's the end of the slides.
Well, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Patrick, for the presentation. That was really good. Real good look at TWI and how it can help and where it can help. What kinds of industry, what sectors across the economy. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We have time for some questions. You can ask your question either, using audio. If you want to type it into the chat, I'll read it for you. That's fine. Either way, talking about culture and engagement, it's really important. I've been doing a lot of assessments, not just of manufacturing companies, but of other kinds of companies, healthcare and education and service and so on, not-for-profits. And over the last 20 years, probably 40 or 50 companies a year in some of the years. And there's two things that I found were really, really important to any organization to performing well. One was the commitment from the leadership, but the second was commitment and the engagement of the employees. So you heard Scott and Patrick talking about that. It really is important, and with a process that can address that in a very systematic way, I think is really helpful in turning around culture. Essentially, I think getting the culture on your side, so to speak, so that people feel committed, people feel engaged, and they're aligned with your mission emotionally, and professionally, they're aligned with your mission, and it becomes their mission. They become owners, and there's a lot of ownership in a company from employees. Any questions? Here's a question I see on the chat. How would you overcome management's lack of engagement with the improvement process? They talk the talk, but don't walk the walk. Any pointers or past experience you can share? And that's Susan's question.
Scott, you want to take that?
Yeah, I can handle that one. Yeah, that is a classic failure point for many programs and processes. You have to get management to really, number one, they have to understand what it is that you're going to do. What is it all about? They have to really understand how it's connected to their strategies. Where this fits in to drive and achieve those strategies can be a tactical, component to it. They have to understand from a resource standpoint what it's going to take, and they have to be involved. They have to be involved, not just nod their head, say, yeah, go ahead and get it done. But they have to be involved. They have to walk the talk, so to speak. And so they have to be challenged. They have to be challenged at a certain level to say, okay, and it can be hard internally to challenge, and it's one of the things that we insist on when we start working with an organization, because that's the biggest failure point with TWI or any program, from my opinion, is the management's failure and not supporting it effectively, trying to do too many things at once, moving to the flavor of the month or the next shiny object over in the corner, and not following through with seeing something to completion.
And what we like to do at the TW Institute is, we'll look for opportunities to do a pilot project to kind of a proving ground, maybe a small area where we can actually prove, the efficacy, of the methodologies. Just recently during the pandemic, we did a lot of work with Gallo Wine, and some of our trainers went up there and helped them to get some new equipment and lines running. And just, for those of you who worked in manufacturing, you know how difficult that is. They were literally what we called a vertical startup. They were literally able to turn on, they had all the training done, all the people on board, everybody focused. The machines came on literally the first week. They were shipping, tens of thousands of cases of wine. And that got management's attention, right, Scott?
It did, yes.
Everybody came on board real fast.
Results will garner attention.
I've got something, Phil.
Go ahead, James.
I'm familiar with this process. I'm familiar with the 5 to 6 modules. A consulting company came out to us while I was at Aviva, Drug Delivery Systems, Transdermals, and rolled this out. Most of the modules are about 3 hours long, but I found, and I assumed this responsibility afterwards. But I found the best way to deliver this is to make it totally interactive, because there's a lot of one-sided information here. But if you don't give them homework assignments, if you don't explain the A3 methodology on how to diagram a problem and bring it back the next week, you're going to lose them, and it's going to fail. It's not going to work. So you have to build these problems in and give them assignments and expect them to come back and then project it. Group discussion, people learn from each other, because if not, I got a lot of great information here tonight. Thank you very much for that, because I'm going to roll that out and include it in my new presentations coming up this spring. But that's how I found it's most effective. Put pressure on them and get them to participate, homework assignments, etc.
James, going back to the 40s, the founders of TWI knew that. They called it learn by doing. So it's ingrained in our training manuals that we make that application literally from maybe not day 1, but day 2. They actually start bringing in real, not just makeup jobs, real jobs from their departments and applying those methods that I showed you.
Yes, exactly. And get them thinking about process improvement in there. You can do it, you can test it out. Okay, what could you do at the house? But you know what? It really focuses on the job in your department. What is it that is lacking? Okay. Have the nerve to speak up and say something, but in a collaborative environment, they're going to feel comfortable to speak out. So you have to foster that trust.
Yes.
Okay. I've got another question here from Diego about how do you face, from a training perspective, how do you face multicultural and age differences in the workforce?
I can address that, because really going back to my original work in Japan, we were sending, my job was to train all the Japanese guys going all over the world, back in the early 80s when the Japanese were booming and building factories all over. And TWI was a great vehicle, to do that when people were not native in different languages. Because when we broke it down, what I showed you, those breakdown into those simple words, it was really training people. How can I explain this in just a few simple words and get right to the point? Not just blabbering, and just making people confused. And so it was a great methodology for communication. And what we found even today, when we have plants, where we have multicultural or multilingual people, it's actually the non-English speakers who do really well, because they really understand what the methodology is trying to do, to focus on those key points of what we want. And then also with the job relations, when we talk about respect for people and, some of the things, I couldn't get into all the details, but treating people as individuals, understanding their background, having empathy, for their different circumstances. Supervisors really need to learn that. They're not going to just walk in the door, with those kinds of skills.
Thank you. The point you made earlier, Patrick and Scott, about TWI being applicable to any sector of the economy, including healthcare, whatever. I look at it as process is process, and everything we do is or should be a process if we have a customer for that process, and the tools that are used to improve process, again, work on any process, whether it's production or office process or anything else in a non-production area, whether it's healthcare, again, education, or whatever.
And going back to the gentleman's question, culturally, we are teaching TWI. We have trainers all over the world. And I can tell you from direct experience, whether we're teaching in China or Hungary or Mexico, everybody understands TWI because it's those fundamental principles about process, about people, about culture. No one disagrees with anything that's on those little cards that we put in our pocket. And that's, to me, that's proof that they really are true. They're really true principles that hold for any industry, any culture.
Yeah, that's good. And the other point, that James was making about interaction, in training, interactivity in training. When I've seen some training classes where people act like, and in a good way, they act like children, because that's how children learn. That's how we teach children, is with interaction, hands-on, and adults are just like that. I mean, we all like that. We don't like to just sit and be talked at, and we want that hands-on, and that's important for engagement, and not just in the training environment, but in the production, in the work environment. It's very important to have that kind of engagement with your people, the interaction and what's going on.
Phil, that's a good point, because, when I talk to management level people, they're saying, oh, this is like kindergarten, you're going to make them repeat it. But when you get out on the floor, they're like, yeah, that's what I want to do. Make me say it again so I can get it. And the people out on the floor, they really understand how that works. Whether you're 5 years old or 50 years old, we're still learning, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, Scott and Patrick, I thank you on behalf of everyone here. Thank you very much for being with us tonight and sharing this information about TWI Institute. We really appreciate your time and your comments and the entire presentation for our benefit. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight.